All right. Well, my second question is, can you tell me a little bit about your time in the Marines, what you did when you first got in, and that kind of progression as you stayed in the Marines?
Yeah, sure. So, I wish I could tell this really romantic story about joining because I was in love with the Marine Corps. That wasn't necessarily it. I was just at a place in my life where, quite frankly, I feel like I needed a place to go. And, grew up in a broken home, didn't have much of a sense of family. And a lot of the things I'd heard about the Marine Corps was that, it was you could get a sense of family and things of that nature. The Marine Corps recruiter, now that I've had a career in sales and selling, he did a wonderful job because I remember showing up to the little armed forces center, the little strip mall, and they had the Army guy and the Navy guy and the Air Force guy, and the Marine Corps guy was across the hall. And so I went and talked to the Army guy first, and then I talked to the Navy guy, and I went to go talk to the Air Force guy, and he wasn't in the office. And so I walked across the hallway to the Marine sitting at this big gigantic desk. And he didn't even look up. Like he felt my presence walk in the room, and without looking up, he said, "This is not for you." And I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "Are you the guy?" And he looked up at me and he said, "Are you the guy that walked into the Army office and the Navy office and the Air Force office?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Yeah, you don't have what it takes." And I said, "Well, what would make you say that?" He said, "Well, if you went and walked into all those other places, you clearly are somebody that's looking for the GI Bill or a job or a trade that you want to learn." And he said, "That's not what the Marine Corps is about. The Marine Corps is about family." And he said all these things, and he kind of challenged my toughness, which in my arrogance and pride, I was like, "Oh, no, I have what it takes." And he was like, "Okay, well then show me." And I must have been the easiest sucker he ever signed up in his life. But the way that he played the psychology of that was really great. But I joined the Marine Corps in 1996 and was a military policeman, was a part of their SRT team, was a combat engineer. So I've got a couple different MOSs. Got out and then was in the reserves, got activated out of the reserves for Enduring Freedom. I am not a combat veteran. That's one thing I make pretty clear to people when I speak to them. And everybody says, "Oh, thank you for your service." And I always listen to them and tell them, you're welcome, but just understand that I'm not a combat veteran. Most of the people that I was in with did see time overseas, and they bear the physical, mental, and emotional scars of having done so. And I am not one of those people. So I spent some time in the reconnaissance community as well at the tail end of my career. I like to tell people all the time that the easiest, most difficult decision I ever made was to get out. The Marine Corps is very clear that it is mission accomplishment and then troop welfare. And I wanted to be able to focus on my family. And when I got married, I made a commitment to my wife that my family would always come first. And so whenever you are in the military and they tell you that their mission comes first, those are two things that unfortunately are at odds with one another. And I'm grateful for the people that are willing to put that first, but just for me, it was a decision I had to make to put my family first. So,
yeah.
So here I am. I got out in 2004, technically out of the active reserve at that point. I'd already gone into a career after I'd come off active duty back in 1999 and was looking for something to do. And my dad was in technology sales and had told me how great it was. And I listened to him for years, but I didn't want to go into that industry because I didn't want to be a guy that, whose dad helped him get into an industry. And so I went and did some other things. And then, finally said, I think I'm going to give this technology sales thing a go. I started in January of 2000 as a salesperson strictly over the phone. And then my career has gone in a number of different directions since then.
Okay. So tell me a little bit more about that transition. Was it pretty easy to step into tech sales because of your dad, or did you still go through a struggle finding a role?
It was a struggle, and I was fortunate at the time that I went to work for a really large company. And so when I started, I interviewed with them and they said, "Hey, we want to give you a job and you can do all these great things and you can make great money in commission, but it comes with a base salary of $25,000 a year." which was significantly less than I was making in the current role that I was in.
Yeah.
And so I was really, I immediately was struck by just the difference in the way that the compensation works. Although I love the idea of it being, everybody kept saying, hey, listen, that, the compensation is more tied to your effort and your ability to execute, which really resonated with me. But it was a challenge. I was not a guy that grew up passionate about technology. I didn't build computers in my spare time. I wasn't a gamer. I didn't naturally gravitate to technology, but I loved thinking through the elements of problem solving and some things of that nature. But I was fortunate. I went to work for a large company, SBC Communications, and they were intelligent enough when I started to say, hey, you know what? I know that we've given you a job as an inside seller, making 120 dials a day, but we're not even going to let you touch the phone for 3 months. So my first 3 months in the role, I went to training from 8 to 5 every day for 90 days on learning the industry. It was really more technology oriented. One thing that they didn't teach at all, unfortunately, was anything around the importance of communication or connection, active listening, prospecting. It was really more around, hey, when you get on the phone and you start to get into a technology conversation, do you understand the technology? I wish it would have been a better balance, but I'm still really grateful that they made that investment in me. When you look at companies today, very few companies actually subscribe to that type of mentality. It's definitely more of a sink or swim, even for the large companies. And I know Mr. Brown worked at IBM for years, and they're definitely one that believed a lot in professional development, and they don't do that anymore. Now you go to IBM and you get started, and they expect you to step in and start performing from day one, and if you don't, they'll move you out. So it was a difficult transition for me. In fact, the first few years were very difficult. It was just a dynamic industry. Technology is very dynamic in nature, and just in that it's always changing and evolving, and it was tough. I enjoyed it because I like to learn, but it was very challenging.
Okay. Yeah. So what made you take that step from inside sales or account manager to the next level of director, or most recently EVP?
Yeah. So to give you a little bit of some background just on my journey. So I started as an inside seller. I did that for 10 months, and then I was offered a role as just a traditional account manager, an outside selling function. And I went into that role, and I was only in it a short time, and I got a phone call from someone who asked me if I wanted to be a sales engineer. And it really blew my mind that they would even think of me necessarily for the role, because I was still getting my head around technology at a high level. So to think about having to go get all these additional certifications to get more granular about the technology was really tough for me. But ultimately, I decided to go down the sales engineering path for a stretch, quite frankly, because I knew that my gap was that technology acumen. And so I really wanted to dive into it and immerse myself in it. So I went from an inside seller to an outside seller to a sales engineer, back to an outside seller at a very large company. And then I really started to look at what I wanted to do, and I entered into a kind of a phase where I thought my gap as an individual was consulting or business acumen. So I felt like I had a decent understanding of technology, so I left SBC Communications and I went to work for a small pure play consulting startup, and I learned more in my first year there than I had learned in 5 years at SBC. I was surrounded by incredibly high aptitude, high capacity people, most of whom came from the likes of Accenture and PwC and companies of that nature. And there was no question that I was the weak link in the room, and my business acumen was a significant gap for me. But it really allowed me to focus on taking business requirements and business priorities and tying them back to technology and addressing that gap for myself. And so I did that as an outside seller for that pure play consulting organization. And then I moved into a general manager role where I essentially owned a market, and I owned all of sales, all of consulting, all of project management for the DFW market. And then from there moved into other sales leadership functions, into executive sales leadership. And quite frankly, for me, that what's what I'm always looking for is what's the next challenge. And so, I kind of felt like I'd gotten to a point where I had proven myself as an individual contributor. And so then the question for me internally was, can I be a leader of leaders? Which I actually think correlates a lot to the gift set of folks that come out of the military. But most salespeople, even though they're individual contributors, just by nature of the role that they're in, they have to lead well. So most of them, even though it's an IC function, technically they're leaders, and they have to lead from the seat that they're in. So for me, it was, can I take a group of high aptitude, high capacity, type A personalities, and can I lead them well and prove that to myself? And then it morphed into, can I go someplace and build a team from scratch instead of inheriting a team and working through the nuances of trading up and development? Can I do that from the ground up, essentially? So for me, it's always been about the next challenge. It's been less so about necessarily wanting to climb the corporate ladder, so to speak. And I've worked in very large organizations, and I've worked for early stage startups. For me, it's really about what's challenging.
Okay, that's awesome. I love that. So one of the biggest questions that a lot of veterans ask coming out of the military, they're looking for a job that has meritocracy and has a rewarding compensation plan. You mentioned taking an inside sales role that was lesser at first, but can you talk to me about the compensation differences between starting in inside sales versus where you are now? You mentioned it wasn't necessarily a stair step, but what would be attractive from a financial aspect of that?
Well, I think so. I think this is the best job in the world, if you're going to call it a job, which I don't necessarily like that term, but that's a term most people understand. And the reason why I think it's the best job in the world is because of the financial opportunities that exist, in addition to just the freedom and the flexibility. You have to have a very entrepreneurial spirit. Mm-hmm. You definitely have to be willing to bet on yourself. It's typically not a function where somebody comes in and just goes, well, you're a high aptitude guy, or you're an academy graduate, or you have an MBA, or whatever the circumstance may be. So here, let me reward you with all these dollars up front, or guarantee you the ability to earn this money. It's really more about defining an opportunity and saying, listen, if you think you can execute against this opportunity, you can be rewarded financially and with flexibility that you never thought possible. At least for me, I never thought possible. And I never in a million years thought that I would have an income better than people in the medical profession. It almost seemed backwards to some degree. But really, in terms of your question, which I think originally started as, hey, what's the difference between getting started and today? And to answer that question as pointed as I can, really the only difference is I do have a higher base salary, but that still doesn't take away the fact that the majority of my income is what's termed as at-risk income, which means it's tied to my ability to drive revenue and profitability. And if I am not driving revenue and profitability, I am not making the money that I need to maintain the quality of life that I have, that I need to send 2 kids to college in 18 months, and things of that nature. But the big thing is I have the ability to control that more than I would in just kind of a real fixed corporate environment that's predominantly a base salary and maybe a small fixed bonus structure. It's really up to me to go earn what I think I can earn. And it's been more rewarding than I would have ever imagined.
Good. I love that. That's a great answer. So tell me more about Tridius Technologies. What do you do there? What does the company do?
Yeah, so Tridius Technologies would be considered an early stage startup as well. I'm kind of sticking with my recent history. Technically, I'm the EVP of Sales and Strategy, and so what that means is I have responsibility for revenue and profitability growth, in addition to our strategy consulting practice. So at Tridius, we have 2 business units. We have a strategic consulting business unit that does process innovation, digital transformation consulting. It's a small team of former executives, and when I say executives, I mean CEOs, CFOs, CIOs, and folks like that go out and have very strategic consulting discussions with clients that, quite frankly, have nothing to do with technology at the root of how they start. It's really about, can we help a client either drive efficiency and profitability by changing the way that they've historically done something, or can we get involved and engage with them to help them identify adjacent revenues that would be easy for them to capture that they're not currently doing so today. We also have a technology practice, and our technology practice has 3 focus areas. The first one is business intelligence and analytics. The second one is application development and DevOps. And the third is Microsoft Cloud, which essentially is Azure, IaaS, and PaaS. And so what we found is the mixture of being able to help clients really connect their strategy with a technology vision and roadmap is essential. Most companies today are starting to figure out that regardless of what line of business they're in, they're a technology company. And so one of the reasons why I think this is the best time to be in this industry is you have organizations like Domino's, who most people would say, well, Domino's is a pizza company or it's a delivery company. Domino's is the first to say self-admittedly, we are a technology company. And what's interesting is even you see this played out even the way they do advertising, where you will occasionally see advertising at Domino's with a pizza, but more often than not, you're seeing them show you a mobile app, a rewards program that's driven by technology, an autonomous delivery vehicle, which is a rolling data center. Companies are starting to understand that they're technology companies and that they can't execute against their strategic priorities unless their strategy and technology are really united. And so really for us, that's our charter as a company, is to help organizations unite their strategic vision with their technology roadmap. And we do that, we like to say, by inspiring people, innovating technology, and improving business. That's really we call it the 3 I's, to inspire, innovate, and improve. And we're pretty fanatically focused on those things.
That's great. Okay. So over your career in tech sales, what has been the most challenging part about it?
The most challenging aspect about it is even for someone who is a self-admitted lifelong learner, you have got to stay committed to professional development, number one. Number two, you have got to remind yourself every day that complacency is the enemy. And where that gets really tough is this is a career, you've heard me say, can be very financially rewarding. And unfortunately, what people will do is they start to taste the fruit of that financial reward is they let off the gas a little bit. Well, unfortunately, if they do that, they're gonna see their career start to stall out a little bit, simply because as folks that are technologists and entrepreneurs and business folks, we've got to continue to stay ahead of all of that, and it changes. And it's interesting because we love to talk to people about how technology or process innovation disrupts industries, but we don't look internally at how even sales is being disrupted by the rate of innovation, which I will say, and I think this is important, we live in a world where we are operating at a rate of innovation that we have never seen. There are new technology features being released every 14 minutes on average. So for us to be the people that lead from the front and try to understand how these new innovations are impacting business, you've got to be committed to the development of yourself continually. You can't let an organization define that for you. Even great organizations like Qualled that do a really good job in the beginning, you've got to maintain elements of that when once you step out of kind of the safe confines of an organization like Qualled, you've got to stay dedicated to that. And you really got to stay in front of it. So you can't let the money distract you whenever you finally arrive at that place where you're earning an income that might surprise you or makes you think that you've arrived. Because if you don't stay committed to the development, that income is, as soon as it's there, it's going to go away.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you mentioned something earlier that in your career progression, you are looking for the next challenge and you're always looking for the next challenge. I've seen that a lot with military veterans that have that same mindset. And so in your opinion, what are those skills or mindsets that veterans have that really correlate into tech sales?
That's a great question. I'm glad that you asked it. And what's interesting as I lead into the answer, because I won't answer your question directly, if you look at sales in particular the last 5 years, what's interesting is you see a washout rate that that rivals some of the most elite schools in the military, 60-70%, where people get enamored by the financial opportunity or the flexibility, and they think that all sales is golf and shaking hands and kissing babies, and they get enamored by their perception of what sales is. And then when they get in there and they understand what it really is, they have a very difficult time. And so you see a lot of people that enter into the field that don't make it. One thing that I like a lot about military veterans, and this is back to, I typically try to stay away from cliches or buzzwords, but I'm going to use two here to help me out because I think it'll resonate with a wider audience. There are two things in particular that veterans bring to the table, and the first one is grit. And grit's not my term. You got to give Angela Duckworth the credit for that. She wrote that incredible book that's called Grit. What's interesting is she wrote that book on the heels of doing a study on the importance of emotional intelligence, or EQ. So before, people started to say, man, grit is really, the trait that matters most people would say, well, it's EQ. The thing that really differentiates, people that are successful from those that are not, in particular in our industry, is EQ. Well, here's what's great. Whether you think that EQ is number one or number two, or you think grit is number one or number two, what military veterans bring to the table are those two things. They are gritty, and they've got high emotional intelligence. And so logically on paper, they are ideal candidates. Now, that doesn't mean that they're all going to make it, and that, everybody's gifted differently, but they bring those things to the table in bunches. And, that's one thing as I continue to participate with the cohorts, I am continually surprised, and shouldn't be, just by the level of grit and EQ they bring, even into, the exercises there. And, it's the reason why I feel confident tying my personal brand, outside of just being a veteran wanting to help other veterans, tying my brand to Qualled is because I know that veterans, they've got grit, they've got EQ, they're great problem solvers, they understand problem solving in dynamic, fluid environments. They typically can connect well with people, in particular folks that are combat veterans, because they're used to working with folks in foreign countries where you've got language challenges and challenges with culture and, other challenges there. And obviously in the military, there's a chain of command, but everybody at every level learns a degree of leadership, and that translates very well. But the two top things are grit and EQ, no question.
Okay, love that. Well, I know we only have a couple minutes left, so the last couple questions I have is, one, it's easy. What's your favorite book or podcast that you recommend for people wanting to increase their continued education?
So I am a voracious reader. I read a ton. If I had to pick one author outside of the Bible as a guide, it would be John Maxwell. John Maxwell has written a number of books. He is one of the top leadership consultants in the country. He's written a book called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. He's written The 360-Degree Leader. He's written Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. Those are three of my top favorites. If I can only read or listen to one person, it would be John Maxwell. But there are so many other great people out there. Simon Sinek, obviously, is incredible. He's got a number of books, Start With Why, Leaders Eat Last. Daniel Pink is also a great author as well. He wrote the book Drive. He also wrote the book To Sell Is Human, which a lot of people get caught up on this, well, I don't want to be a salesperson, because they relate sales with something that seems almost slimy or, something like that. And so I love the book To Sell Is Human, because it talks about how every single one of us is a seller. And so those are probably three of the folks I would say. If there were only three, those are three good ones. I will also say the one last one is Never Meet in the Middle. It's another really great book. Chris Voss is the author, and he was an FBI hostage negotiator.
Yes. And
he talks about how he correlates negotiating with terrorists into negotiating in the business world, and it's a book that I read every year at least once, and it's really good too.
Yes, Never Split the Difference. Is that the one you're talking about? Yes, good book.
Never split the
Love
difference.
that one. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what would you say is the best advice you have for someone interested in tech sales, wanting to get in but not sure how or if they should?
So my counsel to somebody, if they were saying, hey, listen, this is something I'm considering, is number one, I would encourage them to consider it. But I would tell them that, listen, that, they've got to go talk to people, whether they've already got their own mentors that are already in place or just people in the industry. And they just need to have some conversations around what it looks like and get some perspective from a few people that have done it. And I would be really careful to say, hey, don't just talk to people that do it and do really well. I would probably even try to put them in touch with folks that have come into the industry and figured out that it's not for them. Just because I think this is the best job in the world or the best opportunity in the world, it's not for everybody. And so the goal is for people to really take the gift set that they've been provided and use that in the way that best allows them to do that. So it's awesome if people can find that here in this industry, but if they can't, then we just need to guide them to the place where they can use the gifts that God's given them to the best of their ability. And so, but I would highly suggest that they at least give this a look as they're figuring out where their gift set fits best.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, thank you so much. All of these answers were so helpful. I'm tempted to just share this whole recording now.
Yeah.
We will see though. But I really appreciate your time today. I think it will be very beneficial to those candidates who are considering tech sales or considering our program. So I'm definitely excited to have you back as a coach, and I will let you get on with your day now.
Yeah. Well, I'm here to help. So as you process through what we talked about this morning, if there's something I can give you clarity on or I need to better articulate something, just let me know. And as I've said repeatedly, I'm going to continue to say it. I'm grateful to participate in the program and add whatever value I can. Mm-hmm. So trust me, I will tell you guys if you reach out or ask for too much. But until then, keep reaching out and keep asking if I can help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, you too.
Bye.